Good evening and welcome to News Review. The Foreign Secretary, Philip Hammond, this week said relations between Britain and Gibraltar have never been closer. Speaking at the Gibraltar reception during the Conservative Party conference in Birmingham, he said the Conservatives look forward to another 300 years of British Gibraltar. Mr. Hammond referred to the Spanish border delays as particularly harsh and suggested that the European Commission may take legal action against Spain if it fails to act on the EC's recommendations to ease traffic flow. He added that the UK would closely follow progress on the works on the Spanish side of the frontier so that they don't turn into an excuse for further delays. To cheers from the audience, the Foreign Secretary said Gibraltar would never be sold out by a Conservative government.
We are resolute in our defence of British sovereignty over Gibraltar. We never let an unlawful Spanish incursion into British Gibraltar territorial waters go unanswered. And we will continue to respect the wishes of the people of Gibraltar. The UK will never enter into arrangements under which the people of Gibraltar would pass under the sovereignty of another state against their wishes, and the UK will not enter into any process of sovereignty negotiations with which Gibraltar is not content.
Meanwhile, the Chief Minister said the United Kingdom government had been upfront in its commitment and defence of Gibraltar. In his own address, Fabian Picardo also made clear Gibraltar had always and continued to reciprocate whenever it was called upon. While in the UK, the Chief Minister held a meeting with the Foreign Secretary, spending over half an hour discussing topical Gibraltar issues. Mr. Picardo also met with Defence Secretary Michael Fallon and discussed issues related to the future of MOD operations on the Rock. Fabian Picardo also got a chance to exchange a few words with the Prime Minister. Meanwhile, opposition leader Daniel Feetham held several meetings on the back of the Conservative Party conference in Birmingham, meeting Special Advisor to the Foreign Secretary Denzil Davidson and the Minister for Europe David Lidington, amongst others. In other news, the European Commission extended the scope of an ongoing investigation into Gibraltar's corporate tax regime to examine Gibraltar's tax rulings practice and whether its application may be tantamount to state aid. However, the Gibraltar government says the decision is based on fundamental errors of fact and believed the division made by outgoing Commissioner Joaquín Almunia, a Spanish official, has not been made objectively.
The Commission says it has assessed 165 tax rulings granted by the Gibraltar tax authorities during the last 3 years, and says these rulings appear to have been given without an adequate evaluation of whether income has been accrued inside or outside Gibraltar. In a statement, the Commission says it's concerned that all assessed rulings may potentially contain state aid. However, the Gibraltar government says the decision made by the Commission is based on clear errors. For example, it suggests that the practice of advanced tax rulings was introduced in 2010, when it was in fact a feature of the 1952 Act. Speaking to GBC, the Chief Minister said that despite the headline-grabbing press release by the Commission, no formal findings have actually been made yet.
Well, at this stage, all that it means is that the Commission is considering extending its investigation, and we obviously have to engage directly with the Directorate, which is responsible for competition. It's that relevant part of the Commission that's involved, to demonstrate to them why the reasoning that they have put in their press release about why they want to extend the investigation is really entirely flawed, and there is absolutely no reason for them to pursue the investigation any further. In other words, not to extend it, and indeed the existing investigation should now be brought to a complete end with a finding that the Income Tax Act 2010 is fully compliant with EU state aid rules. As you know, the Code Group of the EU has given our Income Tax Act a complete clean bill of health with certain small amendments that my government has made since we were elected. The people who are looking at the Act in the Code Group also look for some of the indicia of state aid, and they found none of them, so it's not surprising that a fairly constituted Directorate General of a Competition Commission would also decide that there is nothing more to look at in the Income Tax Act.
Fabian Picardo says his government has full confidence in the rulings of Gibraltar's tax office and that it will be able to allay any genuine concerns the Commission may have regarding state aid rules. However, the Chief Minister says he's not quite so confident in the work of EU institutions, where Spanish nationals can influence the outcome of matters affecting Gibraltar, and believes the waters designation ruling and the Olaf investigation clearly show that.
Well, look, what we have said, and I think it is absolutely fair to say it, because we can demonstrate it, is that whenever there is a Spanish official at some level of decision-making or influence in the European Union, what we have found is that they abuse their position in a way that puts first the national interest and the prejudices of Spain and the Spanish government against Gibraltar. That's what the treaty actually requires them not to do. They have to act in keeping with their treaty obligations and think of what it is that they are there to do for the Commission and for the whole of the European Union, and not to act in the national interests. Of course, you've seen the case in the European Court of Justice thrown out with the Spanish judge involved, who was previously the Spanish government's lawyer, advancing contrary arguments to those put by us. You've seen in Olaf a lead Spanish investigator and a Spanish spokesperson, arguing all sorts of defamatory things about Gibraltar. And now you've seen, on almost the last throw of the dice, Mr. Almunia, a Spanish commissioner, in this particular instance responsible for competition, give us a parting kick, which has put our name in all the international media under the spotlight again for issues related to state aid and the certainty that people can have in the tax rulings of the income tax office in Gibraltar, called into question unfairly in a way that we know is not going to prevail.
Mr. Pigardo says his government will be vigorously contesting the mistaken impression the Commission has, and will continue to cooperate with the Commission to this effect.
We will deal with them in detail, we will deal with them technically, we will demonstrate with the letter of the law and with the letter of the state aid rules that we are acting properly. It will take us time, it will require us to expend a lot of energy in doing so, and in that way Spain achieves that we are having to concentrate on that issue instead of going out and attracting more business to Gibraltar, which incidentally will result either directly or tangentially with more Spanish people also becoming employed in Gibraltar and taking the benefit of Gibraltar's reputable finance centre and the fact that we are fully compliant EU jurisdiction, which is what really produces the 7,000 to 10,000 jobs that there are for people across the frontier every day. But that's the reality of what we're dealing with a Spain that seems to not want to unclench its fist towards Gibraltar.
The government and the opposition went back and forth this week over power generation. The GST said it was remarkable for the Deputy Chief Minister to admit that the power station won't be completed before the next election, and believes the project won't even be started before the GSLP Liberals' term of office ends. But the government again blamed the GST, saying it was its mismanagement and failure to act on reports which placed Gibraltar in the position it finds itself today. It questioned whether the GSD power station would have been built by now, but says that even so, the distribution network would have also needed upgrading in the process. Meanwhile, the opposition argued that if the government had not cancelled the contract negotiated by the GSD, we would now have a new power station. And the Environmental Safety Group waded into the affair, saying a genuine timeline for the construction and completion of a power station is paramount, and that priority for the development, design and building of it should be higher up. The ESG also questions the wisdom of placing further load on the system with the construction of new housing units that will only add to the current needs of the community.
It's horrendous, quite honestly. We've been waiting so long for an indication of what was going to happen and when, that another announced delay is really serious bad news. It's very difficult for me because we get on very well as an environmental group. We get on super well with the minister and his department. There's a lot of interaction with us and things are very positive. But the priority that we were told was going to be given to the new power station when the GSLP came into government, I'm afraid hasn't happened. We realise it's a difficult task. We realise it's a complicated endeavour. There's very technical. There's a lot of engineering questions asked and that need to be answered. But you need to drive that. You need to push that, because it's a situation that is getting out of hand. Well, it's out of hand already, and thousands of people that are suffering 14 years now, with 15 years with the situation, both through the Westco and through this power station behind me. And these people that are living in these new flats, the new flats that are going up just behind them, the flats that are going up in Eastern Beach, all that's just going to make it worse. And now we know that all that's going to be ready before the new power station. So you tell me what's going to happen. It's very bad news, I'm afraid, and it's too late. It's taken too long.
The government this week responded to criticism of its changes to legal aid, saying it's done more on the issue in 2.5 years than the GSD did in 16. Meanwhile, the opposition said the government is again predictably resorting to blaming the GSD.
The government says the GSD fails to understand that the new rules and rates have been agreed with the Bar Council. It adds that these new higher rates apply to all exceptionally difficult and complex cases, whether involving fraud or not, something it says the GSD should be celebrating, given that it's argued there should be no distinction between complex cases. The opposition, however, says the GSLP Liberal government made one change to the legal aid regime to favour the 4 defendants in the Mahrache fraud trial to the tune of millions of pounds. GSD spokesperson for Justice, Selwyn Figueras, questions the timing of the new rule changes, claiming that the remaining defendants will continue to get what he calls this gold-plated legal aid, as they are through the door of the old rules. On the question of legal assistance, the government says the opposition either doesn't or is pretending not to appreciate the difference between this and legal aid. It says it's embarked on a consultation process with the Bar Council on legal assistance for civil cases, an issue it says the GSD ignored for 16 years. The opposition, however, claims that under a GSD administration, both legal aid and legal assistance would have been overhauled by now.
The chairman of the Dr. Hiraldi Home Inquiry, Sir Jonathan Parker, indicated this week he's completed a draft on the final report. Sir Jonathan is now writing to those who are the subject of adverse criticism in his report, so they have an opportunity to respond to or comment on such criticism before the report is finally signed off. These letters should be received by no later than the end of October. The chairman says he will then consider these responses or comments before finalising the report and presenting it to the government as required by the inquiry's terms of reference. The inquiry sat for a whole month last year and heard statements from a number of witnesses, including employees, politicians and former workers.